Kansas Territory, May 1872. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. By the time the clouds broke, the land around the Verdant Creek homestead was a churning brown sea. What used to be fence posts and rows of corn were gone, vanished beneath the floodwaters. The house had splintered like matchsticks. A bed frame stuck out of a cottonwood tree, and standing in the mud, soaked to the bone and covered in bruises, was Elira North. She had not screamed when the water came. There had not been time. The creek roared through the valley with no warning, ripping her home apart. She had thrown herself into the loft with 2 things clutched to her chest: her father's Bible and her mother's wedding ring, and watched her world wash away. She had nothing left. Her parents had passed the previous winter. Fever took her mother, and the grief took her father not 2 months later. 23 and alone, she had stayed on the land, tried to keep the place going, clinging to the only home she had ever known. Now even that was gone. The sky was clear by morning, the kind of blue that should have felt like hope. But Elira stood barefoot in the mud, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the mess. Her lips were cracked. Her dress was torn. She looked like a ghost. A low whistle carried through the trees. A rider was coming down the ridge, leading a second horse. His hat was pulled low, coat soaked from travel, boots caked in river muck. His eyes swept the wreckage, then landed on her. He dismounted fast. "You hurt?" he asked, voice steady and low. Elira stared at him, unsure if he was real. He stepped closer. "Ma'am." "Are you all right?" She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her throat burned from the silt and crying. He took off his hat. Sunlight hit his face. He looked to be in his late 20s, lean but broad-shouldered, with a sharp jaw and eyes the color of storm clouds. "I'm Silas Granger," he said gently. "I run cattle out west of here, was checking fence lines when I saw the flood path. Thought I should ride down." She blinked, swayed a little. "Easy," he said quickly, catching her by the elbow. "You been out here all night?" Elira nodded, barely. Her knees gave. Silas caught her before she hit the ground. He picked her up like she weighed nothing and carried her to his horse. "Let's get you out of here." She did not argue. Silas had a lined shack on the north edge of his property, 1 room, a stove and a cot. It was dry and it was warm. He laid her down with a blanket and stirred the fire higher. She had not spoken a word since he picked her up, just laid there, pale as the linen in the corner cupboard. He filled a tin mug with water, crouched beside the cot. "Drink this." She took it with shaking hands, finished it in 3 sips. "Thank you," she rasped. He nodded. "Do you want me to send for someone? Family?" She shook her head. "There is no one." Silas sat back on his heels. He did not push. She looked down at her dress, now dry but stained with river mud. "It was my parents' land," she whispered. "It is all gone." Silas drew in a slow breath. "You made it out, that counts for something." She looked up at him. Her eyes were amber, touched with green at the edges. He had never seen anyone look so lost, but in that moment, something flickered there. Not hope, not yet, but something close. He felt it, like a pull in his chest. "I will help you rebuild," he said. Elira stared at him. "Why?" He hesitated. Then said, plain as daylight, "Because I saw the way you stood there in the mud. Like you had nothing left, but you were not backing down. I do not know what comes next, but I figure if anyone can make it through, it is you." Something shifted in her face. She looked away, but her voice was steadier when she said, "I do not know where to start." "We will figure it out," Silas said. "Together." The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Silas was by the stove, bare forearms dusted in flour, flipping biscuits onto a tin plate. He looked over his shoulder when she sat up. "Morning," he said. "You feeling all right?" Her hair was still damp, her cheeks hollow, but she nodded. "Better." He handed her a plate. "Eat. Then we will ride back to your land, see what is left." She looked at the food, then at him. "Why are you being kind to me?" Silas leaned against the edge of the stove, arms crossed. "I went through something like this years back," he said. "Lost my brother in a barn fire, lost the barn too. Folks helped, fed me, gave me work. It stuck with me." Elira looked down at the biscuit in her hand. "And truth is," he added quietly, "the way you looked at me, I do not know, made me want to make sure you are all right." She looked up. Their eyes met. Neither of them looked away. By noon, they were back at her homestead. The silence was heavy. Silas walked the edge of the creek, stepped over broken boards, and yanked free a half-buried shovel. Elira moved slowly through the wreckage, stopping at the place where the porch used to be. She crouched, picked up her mother's copper thimble. Silas watched her. "We can tear down what is left," he said. "Clear the foundation. I will help build something new." She did not answer at first, then softly, "Would that be all right, me staying?" He stepped closer. "You can stay as long as you want." She looked at him again. That flicker in her eyes, it was stronger now. Trust, he saw it, and something else he swallowed. "I mean it, Elira." She nodded once. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cold, but she did not let go. And neither did he. The days turned warm again, and the land began to dry in slow, stubborn patches. Mornings came cool with mist rising from the creek, and the air held the scent of damp earth and sun-warmed bark. Silas brought tools from his ranch: an axe, 2 shovels, a plane for shaping boards, and Elira found a rhythm in work that asked nothing of her but presence. She wore a pair of old trousers Silas had loaned her, rolled at the waist and cinched with a strip of ticking. They were too big, but they let her move easier. She worked beside him, clearing debris, salvaging what they could. Her palms blistered, then calloused. Her voice grew steadier. Silas noticed the way she studied the ground before every step, cautious, quiet. Not afraid, exactly, just not ready to trust the land under her feet. He didn't rush her. Instead, he kept pace, offering help only when she asked for it. One afternoon, they stood in the shade of the lone walnut tree, brushing sawdust off their arms. Elira leaned her weight against the trunk, eyes on the creek. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. Silas set his hat back from his forehead. "I did, once." "What stopped you?" He looked out toward the distant hills. "Might sound strange, but I had a horse that wouldn't travel right, no matter what I tried. Bucked and balked every time I pointed her east. I figured maybe I was meant to stay put." Elira smiled, not wide, but real. "You believe in signs." "I believe in knowing when something's worth holding on to." She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I never planned to stay here forever, but I couldn't seem to leave either, even when there was nothing left." Silas nudged a pebble with his boot. "Maybe there's still something here." She looked over, brow furrowed. "Not just land," he said. "Something better, something you build after losing everything else." Her gaze held his, searching. She didn't speak, but she didn't look away either. That evening, they sat on the edge of the new foundation, rough-hewn beams stacked neatly at their feet. The light turned golden over the fields, and the crickets began to hum. Silas passed her a canteen, and she took a long drink before handing it back. "Tomorrow we can start framing the walls," he said. Elira nodded. "I want to help raise the ridgepole." He glanced at her hands, now lined with faint scars. "You'll be ready." She studied the horizon, where the sun slipped behind the cottonwoods. "I used to think I needed to be strong by myself. That depending on someone meant failing." Silas watched her face, the way it softened in the dusk. "And now, I think maybe strength means knowing when to lean, just a little." He didn't speak for a while. Then, quiet as breath, he said, "You can lean on me." The pause between them stretched, but it didn't feel empty. When she finally turned toward him, her eyes held something new, not just gratitude, but trust grown from shared labor, from silence, from the steady work of staying. She reached out, not hesitant, and placed her hand over his. They sat like that, palms joined, until the stars came out. The frame of the house rose slow and true, each beam set with care. The structure took shape over weeks, not in haste but in steady labor marked by quiet understanding. By late June, the walls stood shoulder-high, and the roof braces stretched toward the Kansas sky like open hands. Elira climbed the ladder on her own that morning, hammer looped through the belt of her skirt. At the top, she crouched, aligning a crossbeam with deliberate hands. Silas stood below, watching her balance with the same quiet focus he gave his horses, ready if needed, but never reaching first. "You didn't flinch," he said, pressing a brace into place beneath her. "I don't flinch anymore," Elira answered, bracing her foot as she drove the first nail. The heat was thick, the kind that made wood expand and breath come slower. By midday, they paused under the walnut tree's shade, where Silas passed her a slice of cold cornmeal pie wrapped in oilcloth. Elira ate with her legs drawn beneath her, eyes scanning the edge of the prairie. "You ever think about what kind of life you want?" she asked, voice low, not fragile, just thoughtful. Silas chewed slowly before answering. "I used to think I knew, land, livestock, quiet, but that's not the whole picture anymore." Elira watched him, a faint crease between her brows. What changed? He rested his forearms across his knees. You did, or maybe just the way you look at the world makes me want to look again. She didn't speak for a while, tracing her thumb along the edge of her tin cup. Then, before the flood, I used to plan things in my head. A garden with rows of beans, hens in the yard, maybe a neighbor or two to visit come Sunday. It seemed small, but I wanted it. You still can, he said. I don't want it alone anymore. Silas reached for her hand, not sudden, not uncertain, just a quiet offering. This time, her fingers laced with his without hesitation. They finished their meal in silence. That evening, clouds gathered low on the horizon, lavender and ash in the fading light. Silas lit the lamp in the lined shack and poured fresh water into the basin. Elira washed the grit from her arms, then leaned against the window frame, watching the wind ripple through the prairie grass. I've been thinking about staying, she said. You already are. No, she turned toward him, eyes steady. I mean staying in more than just the land. With you if that's something you want. He crossed the room in quiet steps. I've wanted that since the day I saw you standing in the wreckage, soaked through and still on your feet. She didn't cry. But something in her face cracked open, relief, maybe, or the first breath after holding it too long. Then I'd like to build more than walls with you, she said. He nodded once, then drew her close. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't uncertain. It was the kind of embrace that came after long days and earned trust, the kind that said, "You're not alone anymore." Above them, the rain held off. The sky, for once, stayed clear. By early July, the new house had a roof. The last shingle was nailed down with the sun hanging low, cicadas thrumming in the dry cottonwoods. Elira stepped back onto the packed earth and wiped her brow with the edge of her sleeve. Her body ached in familiar places, but she stood straighter now, her shoulders no longer drawn in like a question. Silas set the hammer aside, then carried the ladder down from the frame. "Ridge holds firm," he said. "You did good work." Elira looked at the house, simple, square, with a porch wide enough for 2 chairs. "It feels different than before," she said. He leaned against the post, watching her. "It is." They sat on the steps once the light turned gold, sharing a dinner of salt pork and late-season greens cooked in a dented pan. Silas passed her a crust of bread, and she broke it in half before eating. The silence between them had shifted, no longer full of unspoken fears, but of quiet understanding. She glanced toward the wagon path. "Will you keep running cattle?" He nodded. "That's the plan. Calving starts again come September." "I've got help lined up for the branding." She drew her knees in close. "I've been thinking about planting apple trees up near the fence line. Soil's softer there." His gaze softened. "That'd be good. You've got the hands for it now." "I want to start with 3, she said. "And build from there." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "That sounds like a future." Elira didn't answer with words. She leaned her head against his shoulder, light as a breath, and stayed there until the stars came out. That night the wind changed. It came cooler from the north, carrying the scent of drying hay and distant sage. Elira rose early before the sun and walked the edge of the pasture in her bare feet. The earth was firm again, cracked in places, but alive. When she returned to the house, Silas was at the stove, brow furrowed over a paper folded 3 times across. He slid it aside when she stepped in. "Something wrong?" she asked. "It's a land notice from the county seat," he said. "They're redrawing property lines along the creek. Surveyors coming next week." Elira's jaw tightened. "Will they take any of what's mine?" "No," he said, "but they might ask you to sign off on boundaries. I'll ride in with you if you want." She nodded. "I don't want to lose what I've rebuilt." "You won't," he said. "Not while I've got a say." Later that day, they rode out together to check his grazing line. The horses moved slow under the weight of the heat, and the prairie opened wide before them, unbroken and dry. They stopped near a wind-worn fence post where the wire had slackened. Elira dismounted first and began coiling the loose wire. Silas stepped beside her, pulling it taut. "You ever think about marriage?" she asked, eyes on her work. His hands paused only a second. "I do." She finished the twist, then looked up. "I never thought I'd want it again." "Not after everything." Silas met her gaze. "You don't have to decide today." "I already have," she said. "I want to build more than a house with you, Silas. I want the rest." He set the wire down and took her hand. "Then let's have it." All of it. They stood there, hands joined beside the open land, with the wind brushing past like a witness. There were no promises spoken, no grand declarations, just two people who had survived the rising water and now stood side by side on solid ground. And when they rowed back home, it was with a sense of something settled not just between them, but in the land itself. The county surveyor arrived just after the wheat turned gold at the edges. He came on a mule, thin and gray, with a steel measuring chain coiled tight at his hip and a ledger tucked beneath his arm. His boots left narrow prints in the dust as he stepped off the trail and into the yard. Elira stood on the porch with her hands folded beneath her apron. She wore a pale blue dress, simple, with a line of mending down one sleeve. Silas came out from the barn, brushing straw from his shirt. The surveyor tipped his hat politely. "Miss North, Mr. Granger," Elira nodded. "We're ready." The man worked methodically, setting his tripod, marking notches with a grease pencil. He asked questions, mostly to Elira, about boundary stones and spring runoff paths. She answered with a steadiness that surprised even her. Silas stayed close, though he let her speak. When the lines were confirmed and the ledger stamped, the surveyor handed her a folded deed with both their names inked in black. She ran her thumb over the edge, then looked up at Silas. "Still feel like new ground," she murmured. He touched the brim of his hat. "Maybe because it is." They watched the surveyor ride off, the mule's hooves kicking up little clouds behind him. Then Elira turned and walked into the house with the deed pressed lightly to her chest. That evening, she pulled a small wooden box from beneath the bed frame. Inside were 3 letters, a brass button, and her mother's ring. She held it up to the lamplight, turning it slowly between her fingers. Silas stepped in from outside, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You all right?" She didn't answer right away. "Then I've been thinking." He leaned against the doorway. "I want to wear this again," she said, "but not as a memory." He crossed the room. "Elira," she looked up. "I'd like you to give it to me this time." Silas knelt, steady and sure. "Then I will." He took the ring from her palm and slid it onto her finger. It fit as though it had waited for this moment. They married under the walnut tree on the first Sunday of September. The preacher came from 2 towns over, riding in with a Bible wrapped in oilcloth and sweat on his brow. There were 4 neighbors in attendance, 2 of whom brought pies and 1 who played fiddle after the vows were spoken. Elira wore a dress the color of late cream, and Silas stood beside her in his best wool coat. When the words were said and the ring returned to her hand for the second time, she didn't cry. Instead, she smiled with her whole face, the kind of smile that rooted deep. After the preacher left and the neighbors trickled away, they sat side by side on the porch as the sun dipped low. The house behind them smelled of wildflowers and wood smoke. Silas took her hand, tracing the line of her knuckles with his thumb. "You scared?" he asked. "No," she said. "Not anymore." He turned toward her. "What changed?" "I realized I never had to carry it all alone," she said. "And I stopped wanting to." That night, they danced slow in the kitchen with the windows open and the floor warm beneath their bare feet. The lamp flickered, and the wind stirred the curtains with a soft rustle. They moved in time with a song neither of them had spoken aloud, a rhythm built from days of shared labor and nights of quiet comfort. They did not talk of what they had lost. They did not need to. Everything that mattered was here. 2 years passed, then 3. The apple trees grew tall along the fence line, their branches heavy with green fruit by the 4th summer. Elira tended a garden that stretched along the southern slope: squash, onions, beans in careful rows. The hens clucked lazily in the midday heat, and a black dog slept under the porch rail. Silas rose early each morning to tend the herd. Elira joined him sometimes, riding out with a basket tied to her saddle, filled with bread and peppered eggs. Other days she stayed back, sewing or reading beside the hearth. When the first child came, a daughter with dark eyes and a voice like her mother's, Silas built a cradle from cedar and lined it with wool. Elira sang to her in the evenings, old songs her mother had taught her, voice soft with memory and hope. They did not speak of forever. They simply lived it. And as the years stretched gently forward, marked by seasons rather than sorrow, the house stood firm, the porch never empty, and the love between them deepened like roots beneath the prairie. They had survived the flood. They had rebuilt not just walls, but a life. Together they endured. Together they flourished.